Hello, welcome back to the Lessons from the Stances series. In this video, we're going to be covering the horse stance, the mother of all stance work, the first stance that you're typically taught in any traditional martial arts. So the stance is like this, right? It's even, right? Both sides equal. I'm not opening one side more than the other. Everything is equal on both sides. So my positioning, right, is essentially, I take a couple feet's worth out, and my feet either point directly forward or slightly outwards to the sides. Depending on your hip and knee structure, you might want to open your stance out to the side if it ends up having a lot of pain as you get down. It depends though. So stand, and ideally you want to get to a point where your thighs are parallel to the ground. You could even have teacups resting on them, but that's aside the point. The point of this video is to understand why we practice this. And it's a lot more than just to hurt your legs so you can get good leg strength. A lot more. And we can look at it from the terminology, horse stance, right? So the horse implies that you are trying to mimic like the horse, right? Some imply this is like a horse riding stance, which then implies that you're the rider standing on the horse. In the terminology that we're using here, is you are the horse. So a horse, very quick, very agile, but also a lot of weight, solid, very hard to tip over. Right? If you try to tip over a horse, he's just going to stand there and be like, what are you doing, man? Okay. But the moment a branch cracks, gone into the woods, right? Never to be seen from again. So it implies agility and stability, not stability or agility. That's a very important distinction, right? Because this stance, obviously, is not meant to be the most agile stance in that, like a cat stance where you're a little bit more springy. This stance is more for developing that stability, but it needs to have agility within it. I need to be able to move, right? Either move in the stance or move into another stance without having to pick myself up and then put myself back down, right? I need to be able to move. And this stance, because it's so stable, allies itself very much with wrestling and wrestling type techniques. Anything where you're grappling, essentially. Doesn't mean that it's only for that, but it's really well designed for that. And before anybody says in the comments, no, you don't face them like this, because that would be dumb for very obvious reasons. It would be more like this here. Not completely to the side here because you have absolutely no stability that way, but a little bit open so you have a little bit of leeway both sides and you have a lot of stability to receive force as well as deliver force, right? When we train like punches like this, right? In application, we would actually be punching more from here if we're practicing in a horse stance. But we practice for here for like a sort of symmetry reason and not for aesthetic purposes, but more to develop power from both legs so that when I'm driving the force, I can drive the force forward from one leg into the next. Whereas here it's essentially like I have to do this side and then switch and do this side, which is good unto itself. But the prior method trains the same kind of leg strength and leg power without having to do a million more reps. So it's a little bit of a more of a symmetrical way to balance your practice, especially because some of us tend to lean heavier on our right side or our left side depending on which dominant hand we have. So like if I'm a right dominant hand person, which I am, we tend to like to face off with our right hand versus our left. And this can cause our body to contract more on our right side, which can cause more stiffness. So this is a way to practice on both sides without having that same contracted stiffness in case you don't practice on both sides equally. So now that that's out of the bag, and we can get back onto the meat of the matter, that's stability and agility, right? So I wrestle with my opponents, I can be able to take their force, but I need to be able to make my moves. I need to be able to make them quickly, because if I'm just sitting there, I'm a sitting duck. He can change position, move around me, and I will just take it. That's not the way. I need to be able to move and adjust as my opponent is changing their strategy. And I need to change my strategies to take advantage of their weaknesses. So we train this one a lot for stability reasons, but we can't rely only on stability. We need to have that agility. Like we talked about in the previous lesson on the introductory video, right? This boot means to take a step. So we have to have that implied movement. So even when we're training in a static position, right, I have this sort of, I'm ready to go. I have this activation in the legs spiraling downwards so that I can move at a given notice without having to pick myself up, right, as I'm getting older, as it tends to be. So you need to have that ability to move, right? So that's the horse stance. See you in the next video.